Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, it's that time of year. It's time for the My Guys episode. Coming up next, right here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Tuesday edition of the show. I'm Louie DiBiase alongside Gino Camilleri. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, Monday through Friday, on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Gino, as I mentioned, today is the My Guys edition of the show. We do this every year before the NFL draft, which, crazy enough, is a little over under 3 weeks now?
3 weeks.
Under 3 weeks. Yeah. I can't believe it's coming up this fast. And I think most draft nerds understand what My Guys are, but why don't you explain for the newer audience, if they haven't heard our past My Guys podcast, what that means?
So this isn't a thing that is just with fans as well. There are scouts in buildings that will put a star next to a guy where they'll pound the table. If it's prospect A versus prospect B, I'm going to take my guy and I'm going to go to bat for him. And that's kind of what we've done over the last couple of years. I think the most famous my guy is not JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Devontae Smith. I was on him for 3 years. Yeah, JJ was up there, but Devontae Smith, sometimes it works out, and other times with JJ Arcega-Whiteside, it doesn't work out. But the Eagles, sometimes they do go and draft those my guys. I had Teron Jackson on that list a couple years ago. They go and add him. So it always adds that little bit extra
taking a Lou DiBiase, my guy? I don't think so. Last year was Christian Watson. I remember the first year we did the podcast, it was the North Dakota State running back, Bruce Anderson. Kane Doe last year from Florida State.
Kane-Do,
So there's been a ton of them. As Gino said, it's just the guys that you're all in on. You're pounding the table for. If you were that scout in the draft room, the gold star, this is your player that you want. You're all in on your team getting. So pretty self-explanatory, but I think people just throw around, oh, he's a my guy. And people are like, what does that mean? So Gino, this year, I don't know if you agree. I feel like it's a little bit, not at every position, like the cornerback position, I think is way stronger, but I think it's an overall weaker class. And I don't know if it's because the Eagles are already Super Bowl contenders. And when you have an elite quarterback, things tend to, I think, relax, at least when it comes to urgency of the rest of the roster, at least for me, when it comes to panic mode. So I don't know if it's a combination of all of that, but I don't have as many my guys this year that I'm super passionate about.
Well, let's just take one of the positions that I love, for example, safety. Yeah. Some years I'm just obsessed with the class that they have, and this year in particular, even Daniel Jeremiah said it. It's a paper thin group.
There's 4 guys, and after that, I'm I'd wait till round 4. Skip
exactly. Yeah, you're really going for 1 or 2 traits at that point, rather than that complete package type of player. The
wide receiver is like that too, Gino. I don't think there's a slam dunk wide receiver one. I mean, there's some guys that I like for certain reasons, but even the receiver class this year is the weakest it's been, I think, in years.
Yeah, and there's a couple positions where it's evident who the top guys are. I mean, you look at edge, and regardless of what people say about Will Anderson, he is the guy. I mean, maybe he's not a generational talent, but he's easily the best edge rusher in this class. Jalen Carter, if you take away anything that happened off the field simply on tape, the guy's a top 2 pick all day long. And you have to go into these drafts, and that's what these area scouts and these NFS scouts who go a year in advance, the Blesto scouts, the same thing. That's where they make their money. And it was actually pretty cool because I know one of the scouts that he was on ESPN last year for the Jets when they selected one of the guys later in the class, and he got to actually call on ESPN, and they put it out. And this is what we love, Lou. Finding those diamonds in the rough, the guy that can come onto this roster, be a depth piece for you, and eventually down the line, maybe he's a TJ Edwards for you, then he's a starter in a Super Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start, Gino, with our offensive my guys. And I think I have more, at least on defense, and maybe again, because it's coming from an Eagles perspective, I think there are more needs both in the short term and the long term on the defensive side of the football. The Eagles have a lot of young elite talent on offense. But there is one guy that I just think would make so much sense for Jeff Stoutland. Saw him at the Senior Bowl, was incredible. He's extremely versatile, super mature, confident player. And he's at a state and a college the Eagles are familiar with. It's North Dakota State offensive lineman Cody Mauch. I think this guy is an option at 30 that we haven't really talked about, where he can play every position, Gino. I think he can play center, he can play guard, he can play tackle. This would be the perfect player that if you need a starting right guard right now and you want Cam Jurgens to focus on center, there you go. If Lane Johnson gets hurt, he can slide over to right tackle. He's just a Swiss Army knife that I think the Eagles would love to get their hands on.
I think they really want to find their next Halapuli Vaitai. And what do I mean by that? And it's exactly what you just said. Not only can he be a player that plays at right guard for you maybe right away, but he can also be a swing tackle for you where you kill two birds with one stone. My guy on the offensive line, I went with Steve Avila out of TCU. Not as versatile, but he's just a motor when it comes to run blocking. And you talk about just wanting to run the ball through the right side. Questions with his pass pro, but I don't really even care at that point. When you have Jeff Stoutland, you can mold this guy out of clay. He's that physical. You can't teach the will and the want to injure a guy every single play legally like Steve Avila has. And Cody Mauch, you talk about that ball of clay, Lou, where he could really be anything for you. I'm with you, man. Draft a guy that can play both sides. He could play the guard. He could play tackle. He's played up and down the line. And that's why the idea of potentially Peter Skronsky in the first round is intriguing to me, because he has the upside to play tackle, but right away you can go and put him at guard. Could Mauch start for you if you not even at 30? Let's say he's there at 62 for you, Lou, and you take
I think from day one, Gino. Yeah,
he could battle at that right guard position without a doubt, in my opinion. I really like that one, Lou.
I think the offensive linemen were the position that, and again, because there's some, needs with the Eagles long-term at right tackle, who's going to replace Lane Johnson. You lose Isaac Seumalo in free agency. He signs with the Steelers. Again, we're confident Cam Jurgens could play right guard this year if he needs to, but we know within a year or two, he's going to be moved right over to center. So that's a gaping hole immediately. And you mentioned the more urgency at right guard. I think it was last week where you didn't want to go back to this guard by committee. And, that's a position that you should not overlook, having that strength there. So I think the lineman is where the focus is. Are there any skill position players that and again, removing the Eagles perspective here, my guy at the skill positions?
Yeah, the Avila one wasn't as much for the Eagles as it was just I love seeing these guys that are just
for sure
pure run blockers right away. Like you look at Quinn Miners, who played out at Wisconsin Whitewater, ends up being the 3rd round pick for the Denver Bronco. And what did he make his money on? Everybody saw him at the Senior Bowl, lifting up his beer keg belly, knocking over trees, just wanting to push a guy from A to B. And I look at skill position, Lou, and this is kind of pick your flavor, right? Like, what do you enjoy in this class? So I kind of went up and down the spectrum when it comes to body sizes, when it comes to what they do. I went at running back, Zach Charbonnet. I really like what Zach Charbonnet could do. And this one, I could see him playing in Philadelphia. One place I wouldn't want to see him playing, and luckily they probably won't invest that back, is San Francisco. He's an inside zone, 1 foot in the ground, gets upfield. You talk about scheming a run game. This guy is that exact player that, without a Miles Sanders who could be that decisive one-cut runner, is Kenny Gainwell going to be that for you all of the time? Or is it going to be Rashad Penny? But at the same time, Charbonnet is younger. You could get him on a cost-controlled deal. And if you don't like taking guys in the 1st round at running back, potentially could be a 2nd or 3rd rounder guy. But I saw Charbonnet live this year, UCLA versus Colorado, and just hitting his assignment, his vision. And he's so big, and taking him down in the open field is tough. And speaking of taking a guy down in the open field that would be difficult, one of two ways. I went Nathaniel Dell, the wide receiver out of Houston. Yeah. He would be a perfect complement to what you have with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And then if you want an absolute specimen, Sam Laporta, the tight end out of Iowa, man. Like, give me either of those two completely different ranges. One's 50, 82, 5'8". The other one's 60, 62, 6'6".
That's why I had Darnell
It's
Washington,
crazy.
Gino, from
Yeah,
Georgia.
Darnell's
One of
another
those,
one, Lou.
those tight ends that are 6'5" plus. I think Washington's 6'7".
Yeah,
I mean,
6'7", dude.
he's an absolute tower of a human, and you see his highlight reels really fun. And you see him hurdling linebackers consistently. To have a guy that big but that athletic,
that's all you got to watch with him, man.
right. Just watch week 1 against Oregon. I mean, he is a specimen, and I love those kind of players that even if they're more raw and sometimes like Jordan Mailata didn't know how to play football at all, I will always understand the logic of just get me that player in there, get me that kind of body type, and I'll figure the rest out. So I think we both had a couple tight ends. I think that's why I like Jonathan Mingo too from Ole Miss. Probably more of a late second, third round selection. Saw some comparisons to just because of he went to Ole Miss. I saw AJ Brown. I don't see that. I actually see a little prime Alshon Jeffrey when it comes to the size, physicality, not blazing speed, but he does have athleticism for a kid that size. I would like that as well in like the later day 2 stage.
And that's where you're going to find these guys. And
yeah,
I believe it was either Dane Brugler. No, it was Jim Nagy that said it, that the NFL doesn't really see this receiver class as many in the media do, that there's only really one first round guy, right? And that being Jackson Smith and Jigba. Say what you want about Quentin Johnson. He's not everybody's cup of tea. But then I'm
scarred from TCU receiver.
Yeah,
I know
too,
it's not the right
too.
way to do it, and I'm not going to do the whole Pac-12 thing, but I'm kind of doing it a little.
There will be a team that takes him, but the Eagles don't need that. But when you talk about these role players, where that's why I love Dell. It's like, could you see him coming in and playing right away in a role that the Eagles don't have? They don't have that guy. I mean, you got Britton Covey, right? But he's more of a true return specialist for you.
Right.
Dell is a blazer. You talk about opening up the field. And what he could do at that size in the open field, the yards after the catch, I mean, he could take away Quez Watkins snaps in the blink of an eye, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was one of the few fun watches, Gino, down at the Senior Bowl, at least when it comes to the skill positions. I wasn't overly wowed when I was down there. The one guy, it's obvious, is Tajay Spears, the Tulane running back. I just didn't want to start with him because it's, very trendy right now. Because you watch Spears and how can you not fall in love with that explosiveness, that kind of wiggle? So
I took him in my mock yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Did you?
Yes, sir.
I felt a little cheap when I saw him available a little later on in the rounds. I'm like, I'll hold off. But yeah, Tajay Spears, a total my guy, I think, for a lot of people, especially fantasy football players at that position. So not as many in the past on the offensive side of the ball. Might have to do with the Eagles and what they already have. But at the same time, I think it is maybe a little bit of a weaker class at some of these spots. Not the offensive line, though. I like the talent that Philly could bring in. My guys, I think that there's more of a bigger number. I think it's on the defensive side of the football. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Gino, tell us about FanDuel.
FanDuel is the #1 sports book here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Not just that, but it's the official sports book of the entire network and LOE. And on top of that, it's the #1 sports book in all of America. I mean, for goodness sake, who else has Kay Adams hooked up on their network? Not only that, they have the sports book, which everybody loves. Grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel. And right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to not $100, $1,000, 1000. It is truly crazy. And all you got to do, grab your phone, download the app, or go to FanDuel.com/lockdown, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 in bonus bets if you don't win. So what does that mean? If you bet $50 and you lose, you get $50 in bonus bets, all the way up to $1,000. If you're a Yankee fan like me and you're betting on Aaron Judge to hit homers, you're, of course, going to cash in. Right now, Champions League action going on as well. You could bet on literally anything over at FanDuel, and you could get your first no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel at FanDuel.com/lockdown to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. It's the My Guys edition of the show. Who are the prospects that Gino and I are pounding the table for? Segment 1, we talked a lot of offense. Gino, let's get into defense now, which is where I think the Eagles are going to focus. in this draft. I think they'll definitely take an offensive lineman. They could go tight end, running back, and receiver. So not to say offense
quarterback
off the board. Yeah, I mean, and they could draft a quarterback with Mariota only on a 1-year deal. But I do think, at least for me, I'm a little more passionate about the defensive side of the football in this class. And I think it is because there's some more talent that I like at the cornerback position, especially, man. Like we talked about how it might be a little weaker of a class overall at certain positions, not at corner. I think this is the deepest and Starfield it's been, in a while. Of course, the last few years you got Sauce Gardner and Surtain and Horn, but I feel like eventually it was pretty thin when you got down within the after the few top rounds. This year, there's guys I like pretty much throughout the entire class.
Yeah, I kind of went cheap at the cornerback position. I think it's the easiest.
You have to, though. That's the ultimate. I mean, that's the ultimate Gino my guy. It's a corner, and he went to Oregon. Come on.
And he's unbelievably tall,
and he's great.
Long, athletic, and he picks the ball off, and he's a boundary corner, and he matches what
I don't think it's cheap. This is just made for you. This is a Gino my guy, and it's pure.
He's the guy. And there are plenty up and down the list, but I mean, if you're going to sculpt the guy out of clay for what I want at my boundary corner position, what school he went to, seeing the big time matchups that he went against, I mean, you're looking at all the big time names, the Jordan Addisons of the world that are coming out of USC. I mean, he's played those guys. He played at Colorado before that. Pac-12 has some good receivers. As much as people in Philadelphia might be biased against it, stay up late and you'll see some good action. Christian Gonzalez, man, whatever team gets him, and Lou, I have a feeling, especially with that Jeff Okudah move today from Detroit, that might be the pick for them. Like, they might have just shown their hand right there. And I mean, if they have a way, they might go and do it. With that
Devin Witherspoon for me is such a fun watch too. And again, like you said, it feels obvious naming the top two corners, but you look at his tape and I see a lot of a guy that I was obsessed with a few years ago, Asante Samuel Jr. I mean, this dude, like in coverage, a little undersized, but his flip of the hips, that like explosiveness, how he can get from 0 to 100 miles an hour that fast and stay with receivers is impressive. And for a corner that undersized, man, he looks like he likes to hit. I mean, he has an intensity coming downhill that I think would be awesome for the Eagles at 10 overall. Gino, I think too, like Joey Porter Jr. is fun because he's kind of like that ball of clay. We talked on the offensive side of football. At corner, he's a little more raw than Witherspoon and Gonzalez, but I mean, we see that kind of length with athleticism. It's definitely fun as well.
That's why looking at DBs is always fun, because you find those guys that's like, what? How are his arms that long? And
like Tariq Woolen last year, how do you not fall in love with that? And then look at what he got in Seattle. Yeah,
I mean, that's really what happens sometimes. Like, you walk into a building, for example, at CGS this year, we had Jordan Riley. He's 6 foot, almost 7, 340 pounds. And you're just standing there, and even scouts are like, who's that guy? Right. And teams that it's a football world, right? And there's football guys that say,
that's when you know someone's got traits, is when you say, who is that guy? And that's exactly what I said about Woolen at the Senior Bowl.
Right.
I had no idea who he was. I'm like,
exactly. You see his arms, and you see how fast he runs, and you see how tall he is. You're like, what is going on here? Like,
that's Porter, man. Again, he's a little riskier, and he's going to fall within, I would say, pick, 13 to 18 in that range. But man, the traits, you can see it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, teams definitely will fall in love with that. And is he as refined and polished as the two guys that we mentioned? I wouldn't say so, but you got to measure upside versus what their floor is right now.
Right.
And that's one of the things that teams will continue to talk about. And the Eagles, they've kind of found that good middle ground, Lou, where they do go on production, but at the same time, like, what's the ceiling on Devontae Smith? Has he hit his ceiling yet? Because in my opinion, he's only going to get better.
So. Right. Is there a corner after the big three that you're in on?
I like the kid out of A&M, man. Like, you talk about just the ability to be. You tweeted about him yesterday.
Emmanuel Forbes.
Yeah, Forbes, dude. Like, you talk about speed and athleticism. I don't care how much he weighs, man. Like, you're a top level athlete.
I said yesterday it's the Devontae Smith of cornerbacks, where it's a slim reaper. And I know this guy's got to be more physical and make tackles, but Gino, I mean, you look at that kind of length and athleticism, he's skinny as heck, but
he did it in the SEC, man. Like, what makes you think he can't do it in the NFL? That's the thing. Like, he's going up against big size wide receivers that are constantly getting drafted. What makes you think he can't do that against those guys that are just already there?
he's so fluid and change of direction. And there was a play that I watched where they threw a back shoulder on him, and it was almost like he was the wide receiver, Gino. He reacted perfectly and made the back shoulder interception. You see that kind of guy, and with the Eagles, I'm like, he's not going to have to start right away. He can bulk up. He can watch behind Darius Slay and James
Still
Bradbury.
Be a sub-package guy, for sure.
I'm perfectly fine with Emmanuel Forbes at 30.
Right. If you get your defensive end, or you get your interior defensive tackle, or let's say you fall in love with one of those
Cansey or Nolan
lines.
Smith earlier. Yeah.
Right. And you're saying, okay, we're going to get the best of the second group there. And you talk about maybe Williams from Syracuse is your cup of tea. And I know I've used that phrase a lot.
There's
but that's
Deontay Banks and
Deontay
Smith,
one of those
South
Maryland
Carolina.
guys. I think one of the Maryland corners would be a home run as well. And they match everything how he wants. And I think when he said that quote, when he wrote down the 3 traits rather after the one draft, can they run? I think it was exactly talking about the cornerback position, because years prior with Sidney Jones or Rasul Douglas, they get 2 guys that are 4'7" cornerbacks.
Well, Jalen Mills too.
Jalen Mills, and these guys can't run. And you talk about some maybe long speed concerns with Devin Witherspoon. Well, I don't care if he can jam and he's up at the line of scrimmage and he's that shifty. And that's what I take with Forbes. Like, you're going to allow some stuff up front, but you hope the linebackers could catch that spill. Darius Slay and Bradbury, who are good tackling, can help out there as well. But deep, Forbes is going to cover you. How do you shadow Nathaniel Dell? You go and put Emmanuel Forbes on him, right? And in this conference, Lou, there's some pretty shifty receivers that would be good for Emmanuel Forbes to get his hands on.
Completely agree. Any my guys at some other spots? How about up front?
Yeah, I think when you go to the interior of the defensive line, Lou, it's easy for me to fall in love with, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name, but Edebaware out of Northwestern. And Lou, when you look at this guy and he could play 3 tech, play 5 tech, there was a guy that was one of my guys a couple years ago who ended up dropping to the 5th round, got taken by Houston, and ended up playing for San Fran this past year. Do you know who that guy is?
We both love this guy,
Charles Omenihu, right? Yeah. And you look at Edebaware, and it's like,
it's a good comp for him.
He's 282, has length for days. He's rocked up, man.
I think he ran a 4.49 at the combine.
Yeah, he was a freak athlete. I mean, Omenahu's not that good of an athlete, but still, like you talk about what you want your guy to do. I want a guy that can play inside, play outside. How do you get 2 positions with one? You take this guy, and the Eagles love this style of player, especially if you're going more of these odd fronts where he might play a 4 tech position that's kind of between the tackle and the guard, or shading the tackle a little bit, where he can hold the edge, but at the same time, he has that freak athleticism to where he can get after the passer. And he played at Northwestern. Imagine great coaching when he comes to Philadelphia, and how good he could be with inside that frame and build that he has.
Yeah, I have my guy in that second tier of edge rushers too. I really like Felix Anudike-Uzomah.
I knew you were going to say him.
Kansas State, right? Or not. I always, for some reason, get Kansas State and Nevada. Like, I don't know if it's because the logos are similar, but
I was going to say Will McDonald, and I was going to say Iowa State. I like Will McDonald a lot.
Yeah, so Felix Anudike-Uzomah from Kansas State is a violent edge rusher that kind of gives me some Yannick Ngakoue vibes, and I think that's a player that if you move down from 30, I think I'd be comfortable with him to 30, or if you're trying to get that edge rusher maybe in the second round, like let's say you go offensive line and then you take a corner on day 1, then that edge rusher on day 2, I think it's 2 of the guys that we mentioned, that those are the players in that range. Maybe you move up a little bit, but it's 62 that you can add as that 4th edge rusher behind Josh Sweat, Hassan Riddick, and Brandon Graham. That's the cool thing, Gino, is a lot of these players we're talking about, they're a little more raw, but when you're coming into Philadelphia, like, you're not going to need these players right away to be the guy at these positions.
Yeah, and you kind of went a little more Eagle-centric, but I think with these guys, and every year my guys tend to migrate towards what the needs of the Philadelphia Eagles are.
Me too. I mean, because we're prepping with an Eagles lens on.
Right.
So.
Yeah, of course we are.
Like, I'm not watching quarterbacks that much.
No, I mean, Jake Haener, I have to say his name at least one
time.
That
is definitely a Gino my guy. I can't believe you
the
didn't
ultimate my guy. I know. That's why I brought up quarterback. I thought you were going to throw out a name, but Jake Haener is my number 1.
Damn, I missed that one right over my head.
Yeah. And linebacker, I don't really have one that would fit in Philadelphia. I still love Noah Sewell. I see him going to New England and just being like their next Kyle Van Noy, like just get downhill, plug gaps, and just fill as a linebacker who has explosiveness and can work in those short areas. But man, when you look at this class, Lou, I love that the Eagles have those top picks, but man, would I love to have like 3 or 4 5th-round picks this year where it's like that guy's traits are just like they're popping out at me right
I think
now.
You're going to see a trade down with one of those picks, and you'll see them collect some extra selections. There's no way to me they have a 3rd-round pick and then they don't do anything till round 7. I don't know. No way. I can't imagine it.
How is Gino chew through everybody's fingernails at that point?
Oh, right. He'll press. All right. We will get into coming up next to wrap up the show. Maybe a prospect or two that we're out on that are not Lou and Gino, my guys. So that's coming up next right here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles, which is presented by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard us talk about this mobile game app, and it's been so much fun playing throughout the year and in the offseason. If you think you'd make a good GM, you got to give this game a try. It's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for pretty much everything, controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries, navigating your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, all the ups and downs of a season, all in this challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free, and it's also playable offline, so play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Eagles listeners, you get a 100% free boost to your franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in all caps, LOCKEDON. That's Locked On, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Eagles fans, we are wrapping up this Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles, the My Guys edition of the podcast. But Gino, now we'll wrap up maybe with, I don't know, I especially you, because I think you're a scout, so I think you like to look at what a player can do versus what a player cannot. But is there a player that definitely isn't a My Guy for you and you want the Eagles to avoid, whether it's like an early round prospect or somebody later on? Is there any guy that you're kind of out on?
So who I want the Eagles to avoid, let me come back to that one, but I'll tell you right away, like miss me with Will Levis. I don't know what people see.
That's
like
fair.
I was wrong with Josh Allen. Don't get me wrong. And I'll eat all the crow on that. I just don't see it with Levis, man. Like outside of the arm, like what does he have? I mean, he doesn't have big time outings. Like I don't think the processing is there. He doesn't come off of his first read and
doesn't feel pressure. He kind of gives me bad Carson Wentz vibes.
Very, very bad Carson Wentz.
Like the issues of Wentz, not saying he's going to end up like 2020 Carson, but the same issues that bad Wentz has, that's Levis at times.
Right. Like, are you going to take the chance of going with Anthony Richardson or
definitely
CJ Stroud or Bryce Young?
No, Levis will be the 4th quarterback off the board for sure.
Hendon Hooker, man, the talk is there. Like,
but see, I do get why you take a risk on Levis over Hooker, because obviously Levis is completely raw.
That I do get.
Yeah, because the size, the arm strength, the mobility, it is all there. But you're right, there's a long way to go. This is a player to me that should not be starting right away, day one. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Will Levis, of the top 4, is clearly the 4th quarterback. And I think you will see that on draft night, that he goes behind Stroud, Young, Richardson, and those top 3. Gino, I'm not in on Lucas Van Ness. I don't know if this was an obvious one, but I think at 10 overall, just a little too rich for me. I think outside of a bull rush, he just does not have a lot of pass rush moves, at least that I saw. I like his versatility, that he can play both the tackle spot and edge, but I keep thinking, I'm like, I don't know if he's what I want on the edge full time, and I don't know if he's what I want at tackle full time. I think he's a good role player, but it's kind of like a tweener linebacker safety. Like, I don't know if this guy's fast enough to be a safety, but he's not big enough to be a linebacker. I just don't know if that's worth like a top 15 selection, even if you were to move down.
Yeah, with him, it's kind of like the same mentality of Adebaware, but do you have a higher ceiling?
You have to take him so much higher.
Right, you're gonna have to take him 1 higher, and 2, does he have that ceiling? Like
Adebaware, he might have a higher ceiling.
Yeah, 100% with that athleticism. I fully
Yeah.
believe that, Lou. And you look at Van Ness, it's like, is that capped, right? Like, is he fully filled out into his frame, which he looks pretty close, man. Like, he is bulked out. Is he anything other than a bull rusher? And I read a great quote the other day. It was in one of those either ESPN or Athletic articles where they talked to a scout anonymously, and they said, be wary of bull rushes because you're not going to bull rush over 340-pound tackles in the National Football League.
Right, you're not going to bull rush Jordan Mailata.
Yeah, you're not going to bull rush Lane Johnson or Jordan Mailata unless your name is Aaron Donald, right? Or you can get up in with this leverage. And I'm with you there. It's like the idea of, would you take him where Kansas City took George Karlaftis last year?
I don't hate
that's
him.
More reasonable.
Yes, if he fell to 30, okay, then like I'm okay with
you grab him for sure.
Yeah, the reason I'm out on Lucas Van Ness is the ADP of where his average draft position is being projected right now. And it's that ceiling, because again, if you're going to take a player like that at 10, I really like his versatility, Gino. But again, the versatility almost is alarming to me because I don't know if he can play either spot full time on all 3 downs. So yeah, there's some other players, but overall, I think Van Ness, Levis, those are the few guys that I think we feel a little bit stronger compared to some other players.
And I think it's reasonable too, because when you look at the upside of a lot of these edge guys, like what would you rather have? And I think in Philadelphia, we'd rather take the Josh Sweats over the Derek Barnett's 1,000 times over 1,000.
Exactly. Give me the speed of Will McDonald or Adebayor. Give me the athleticism, so I think there's some other guys that just value-wise, you get more bang for your buck than Ness. All right, Eagles fans, that's going to do it for this Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more, join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. You can find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get Locked On Eagles. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading, thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.